Thank you. And from the outset, I would also like to place on record my sincere thanks to the hard-working public servants who have spent countless hours preparing brief after brief for estimates. Their professionalism, dedication and attention to detail ensure that ministers are properly informed and that the scrutiny of government can take place transparently and effectively. I know that that work is demanding, often time-pressured and rarely acknowledged publicly, but it's also vital to our democracy. So thank you for your care and expertise and commitment that you bring in serving the Tasmanian community. Estimates exposed a number of serious matters that I will touch on today. It exposed a pattern, a culture of detachment, avoidance, incompetence and political decision-making that leaves everyday Tasmanians carrying the cost. And nowhere was that clearer than in the children and youth portfolio. So let's start with the Strong Families Safe Kids Advice and Referral Line, which is the front door to child safety in this state. Since its commencement in 2018, the Advice and Referral Line has experienced steady growth in the number of contacts it receives each year. And whilst in many ways this reflects an increasing awareness and trust in the service from community and stakeholders, more recent system and legislative reforms, including the implementation of the Child Safe Principles, the establishment of the Office of the Independent Regulator and the Commission of Inquiry into institutional responses to child sexual abuse, have contributed to significant shifts in both the volume and the complexity of demand reaching the ARL. So it's not only call numbers that are rising, it's the level of risk, the seriousness of those reports and the time that is required to ensure that children's safety have been escalated. And yet the government have not matched that escalating workload with resources needed to keep children safe. What we heard in estimates was not a story of reform. It's a case of band-aid fixes and underinvestment in child safety services. Call volumes have been rising year on year. Initially, back in 2018, there was about 12,900 calls to ARL. Now it's closer to 22,000 calls. That is a huge shift, but there hasn't been any additional staff put into that service. We know that burnout for staff is becoming the new normal. There are really high rates of workers' compensation for these staff, mainly psychological injury, and children are waiting longer for help. And the government solution, you might ask, well, there were no plans to increase staffing. We didn't hear anything about that. There's no structural change on the agenda. What is positive in this space was the workforce incentive programs, but that, again, just another band-aid measure. And unfortunately, it seems the government couldn't even deliver that. They promised an extra $100 a week to entice workers to stay, and that was really welcomed by staff last year. But that temporary payment ran out in June. It was meant to be extended until December, whilst the Allied Health Professionals Agreement was being negotiated, but that deal has yet to be struck. So workers in July, August, September, October and November, and even the start of December, I'm led to believe, staff still have not received their incentive payment. It's going to be back paid. They shouldn't have had to have waited 5 months for that money that was promised to them months ago. And there was no reasonable explanation from the Minister about the delay to those incentive payments. And I also note that those payments were only offered to allied health professional staff within child safety services. There was no incentive payment for other key roles like disability liaison officers, support workers or unit coordinators. And those staff all do really important roles within child safety services. We also learned in estimates that the government have done yet another review for the advice and referral line and, of course, outsourced the wait list at a cost of over $800,000 for just 12 weeks' work with Tradewind. So think about that. When children needed help, the government didn't build capacity. They didn't build its own expertise. They didn't back its own people. They subcontracted responsibility and then they called it expanding the workforce. Outsourcing the child safety waitlist is not good enough. It was an emergency patch in a system that has already failed. Tradewind were contracted to progress up to 1,700 conversations, initially over an 8-week period, but that contract was extended for another 4 weeks and completed in the end 1,120 conversations. A substantial number of matters involved concerns relating to sexual abuse and child exploitation material, consisting of both recent and historical concerns. These matters should not have been outsourced to a labour hire company, and concerningly, over that 12-week period, 6 of those labour hire staff chucked the towel in. One of them gave up after week 3. There were more in weeks 5 and 6 and 7. I've been hearing from workers that labour hire staff didn't have access to all the information that they needed, like police reports, so practice managers and practice leaders were sending them information in Excel spreadsheets via email. That is simply not good enough. And what is most disturbing is that the minister said during estimates that if she was in the same position as the former minister with a huge backlog, that she would have done the same thing. And I would really hope that the minister will consider what she said during estimates. Perhaps it's something that she can reflect on over Christmas, because our kids deserve better. The ARL review identified structural confusion and duplication. Staff reported to feeling anxious, and there is a serious problem when it comes to clarity of roles. The review also found that there are wait times of, on average, 1 hour and 22 minutes to get through to the advice and referral line. 1 hour and 22 minutes. That is not good enough. And then when they finally get through to speak to someone, the conversation on average is about 14 minutes, and staff were then reporting they were spending considerable time on admin or taking phone calls that weren't even related to children on their wait list. So then they were having to once again duplicate and hand over case file notes to other workers that were unavailable when somebody called. And instead of releasing the review so that the sector and workers and advocates could learn from it and improve the system, the government locked it away. The document has now been presented at my request. So my question is, if everything's going so well, why hide the evidence? And if everything is improving, why did they need to outsource the waitlist? These are not just statistics, they are children. A child who's been reported to ARL is waiting for safety. A family that needs support and can't get a call back is not a line item, they are trying to survive. These are complex cases, families with complex issues. It's really not good enough. And of course, caseworkers who are overwhelmed with work, they're trying to do the impossible. And every day that support is delayed, the risk doesn't stay still, it escalates. We cannot reform child safety via LinkedIn posts from the department. We can't protect children with branding and graphics and new job titles and think that that's going to make a difference. And we cannot announce change after change and then just hope that it's going to work, because children in this state need more than hope. We need to properly resource the system. Through estimates, we also heard reference after reference to vacancies, burnout and turnover, not just in child safety services, but everywhere the government relies on the public service to protect people. Because the truth is, a system is only as strong as the people keep it running. And if you hollow out the workforce, you hollow out the system. If you don't have enough child safety staff, children wait. And if you don't have enough forensic staff, justice waits. If we don't have enough radio dispatch staff, emergencies wait. And if we don't have enough teachers and TAs and professional support staff, then learning waits and kids fall through the cracks. Because when the public service struggles, Tasmanians struggle. We saw the same failures across police, fire and emergency management. Forensic science services have been under immense workload pressure for years, and they are essential. It's how we solve crimes and how we deliver justice. If we cannot process evidence quickly, investigations stall, victims wait longer, our courts clog up, and offenders remain free in the community. And yet, in estimates, when asked how long the delays are and how they're being fixed, the minister couldn't provide a plan. And it's worse than that. We learned that there are 789 unstarted DNA cases. They were sexual assault samples, and they have been sitting untouched since January of this year. That means that survivors, families and the accused are all waiting because the system is overwhelmed. When governments fail to properly resource forensic science services, the consequences aren't just theoretical. They are real, devastating, and already playing out across Australia. Queensland is the cautionary tale. They underfunded their service, there were backlogs and pressure to do more with less, and that led to catastrophic delays, systemic failures, and ultimately a commission of inquiry that found thousands of DNA samples had been incorrectly reported at levels too low to detect, meaning vital evidence was dismissed, investigations derailed, and families denied justice. Survivors of violent crime were forced to wait months and sometimes years for answers. Offenders who should have been caught earlier remained free in the community. Court cases collapsed and public trust was shattered. Forensic science isn't a luxury, it's the backbone of a functioning justice system. And when the government cuts corners, under-resourced labs, or ignore warnings from experts, the price is paid by victims, families, frontline workers, and the safety of our communities. And at the same time, and this is really extraordinary, we heard in estimates of the disaster that is the Launceston Reception Prison, a building infested with rats. Yep, rats. Broken plumbing, failing intercoms, and it only has 3 showers, and that's often for about 40 inmates or remandees. And the minister himself admitted on the record that it is not fit for purpose. It hasn't been for quite some time. So we have a prison the government knows is unfit, holding people who are waiting for court appearances, which are delayed because forensic science services is backlogged. So if that isn't a system in crisis, what is? This government talks about law and order, but the reality is we have rats in remand and rape kits sitting in freezers. No spin can cover that up. That is failure, pure and simple. Our community deserves so much better, and other parts of our justice and community safety system are in trouble too. Calls to radio dispatch services drop out in 15% of cases before anyone is even able to pick up the phone. Their rosters are also a nightmare instead. These are Tasmanians who are calling in distress. They're calling 000 or the not urgent line, and they are desperate for help, but disconnected. And that's not just a service challenge. That could be the difference for them between life and death. It might be the only time they feel brave enough to reach out. They might be calling about a family violence matter. It is simply not good enough. Our courts are backlogged, and the Honourable Member for Clark, Shadow Attorney General, has already outlined the resourcing constraints of legal aid, and I encourage you to go and have a look at that contribution if you weren't able to listen. And of course, community services funding is now on the chopping block too. This comes at the exact same moment that complexity of cases are rising, demand for services is exploding, family violence services are overwhelmed, and multicultural organisations are dealing with increased safety concerns, especially post the anti-immigration rallies, which should be condemned by every member of this place. And neighbourhood houses and charities are seeing record need in our community. The government's budget papers confirm a reduction in forward estimates for the community sector. And we know that organisations received letters from the government saying, what services can we cut? What can we trim? That's not what they need to be hearing from government right now, I can tell you that. If we weaken community services, you do not save money. You simply shift the cost into hospitals, into policing, homelessness services, and the child safety system. A responsible government would reinforce the community sector, not starve it. We saw this same behaviour across every portfolio: broken promises, delayed commitments, blame shifting, no accountability, and some ministers just simply refusing to own their own decisions. And we saw that in question time today with North Launceston Football Club. With $100,000 promised, it's now been pulled because the club met with the opposition during the election period, and you can dress it up how you like. That's what happened. The club know it, the community know it, and we will hold this government accountable for that awful decision. We know that surf life-saving rescue services have been whisked away from the clubs who have been providing it for years, and I'd love to hear an explanation from that from government. We also know that school infrastructure in my electorate of Bass has been delayed. That's Mowbray Primary School and Port Dalrymple, being pushed further and further away from students who were looking forward to those upgrades to their schools. And this was my first ever estimates, and I must just say I was pretty disappointed with the deflection from ministers, not providing answers, and some ministers seeming to be offended just by us asking the very question. That is not leadership. And I note for Committee B, Minister Diagon has yet to provide answers to his questions on notice, so hopefully that can be addressed soon. That is simply not good enough. All of this might sound quite political, but the consequences are anything but. Children waiting for safety, families waiting for support, victims waiting for justice, community organisations waiting for certainty, emergency responders waiting for staffing and resourcing that they deserve, schools waiting for infrastructure, and volunteers waiting for promises to be honoured. When governments don't do their job, people get hurt. And what we heard in estimates was not simply a lack of answers, it was a lack of concern. I guess that's what really struck me out of estimates. A government that cannot face reality is a government that cannot solve problems. Tasmania deserves better. We deserve a child safety system that measures outcomes and invests in its workforce, a forensic service that delivers timely justice for those that are relying on it, a prison system that doesn't hold people in facilities that aren't fit for purpose, that are filled with rats and broken plumbing. That's just not good enough. And Tasmanians deserve someone to pick up the phone when they call the RDS, not to have 15% of phone calls drop out. And our community services sector needs to be strengthened, not cut. And we need ministers who will listen to their stakeholders in their communities and not punish them for talking to other people when they were just trying to get the best outcome for their club. We want a government that honours its word, not its spin. Governments are judged on how well they treat the vulnerable, the sick, the elderly and the young. And this government is setting the bar very low for our community at the moment. Every Tasmanian deserves a government that measures success not by announcements but by results, and that's what I'll be holding you to account for. Thank you.
Thank the member for Bass.